All right, welcome back, students. It's Friday, April, what is it, 3rd? Yeah, April 3rd. um, one last lecture going into the weekend. Yesterday we talked about America's isolationism and their work going into the war, but despite their obvious favoritism towards the Allies, they still didn't really have a direct reason to get involved as they had not been provoked yet. So in Europe, war was already going on, but tension had been building on the other side of the globe as well, mostly in the Pacific Ocean. Tension had been rising between the US and Japan, and it again stems from back in World War One, or as a result of World War One. If you remember, part of the Treaty of Versailles was the agreement that all of Germany's colonies and territories were taken from them, and half of their, or not half necessarily, over half of their Pacific colonies went to Japan. And with this, Japan becomes more powerful, and Japan starts to show aggression in the Pacific and in Asia, specifically in China. China's got a very complex history. They've been they've gone through many phases. They went through a divided country phase where each individual state kind of ruled as if it were independent, and they've been influenced by the Japanese, and then they've been influenced by the British. So at this time, come the early 1900s, China's really valuable, but they're also quite uh, quite unorganized and not real powerful. So Japan takes advantage and starts moving in a little bit, starts taking parts of China with them. Now, what officially brings the US into World War II is Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. This was a completely unpredicted attack. The US had no idea it was coming. It happens on a Sunday morning at about just before 8 a.m. And Japanese fighter pilots and bombers arrive at the island and just start taking out the ships in the shipyard and in the docks. Um, thousands of American soldiers and even Hawaiian civilians are killed. Two American battleships are sunk, and America's left with a black eye, just punched, and never saw it coming. And it terrifies the American people. Now, when you get into American history next year, I'll give a full day's lesson on Pearl Harbor because it's a huge event. There's a ton of details. Um, you know, Japan was honestly Japan's goal was to either hinder or just scare the U.S. into not joining the war. They thought if they did enough damage to the U.S.'s main Pacific naval base, then it would encourage the U.S. to, well, A, stay out of the war, B, it would do so much damage that they wouldn't be able to join the war, or at least in the Pacific, their navy would be uh, so harshly damaged that they wouldn't be able to intervene. But Japan makes a couple mistakes, and they don't do quite as much damage as they thought. and the U.S. is able to recuperate and eventually retaliate on Japan. Now, the U.S. does take a little bit of time. They declare war immediately, but when they start fighting Japan in the Pacific, they're getting defeated relatively often. Now there's no big battles early on. They're just kind of hit and miss minor conflicts, but Japan seems to be getting the better of most of them. But this definitely terrifies the American people. It's the first time we've been attacked on our own soil since the War of 1812. So the American people start worrying. We've spent all this time being worried about Germany, and now the citizens are terrified of this monster growing in the Pacific. So it was a brutal scene, brutal event, and it definitely scars a lot of people. So there's some of the explosions. These ships are, first of all, housing hundreds of soldiers on them. Plus, the ships have some ammunition on board. So you drop a bomb on a ship that, or drop a bomb anywhere near ammunition, it's going to have double the explosion. And the sky's just filled with black smoke. And hospitals in Pearl Harbor overflowed. I mean, they're having to make cuts at the door, deciding who can be saved and who can't before they even enter. And they're begging people to donate blood because they lose so much. And soldiers are having limbs cut off outside in the courtyard because the hospital's so full and their limb is so injured. It was a gruesome scene, and definitely one that would stay in American minds for a while. So the reason this was such a shock is because Japan had not declared war on the U.S. That's kind of a rule. Like, there are rules to warfare. And as I've said many times before, the rules are decided by the winners, basically, or the punishment for breaking rules is decided by the winners. So Japan knew that they were breaking this rule from the Geneva Convention of don't attack somebody you're not at war with, but they decided, well, if we win, then we'll be the judge and the jury, and obviously we won't punish ourselves. So that was their thought process. Obviously, after the attack, that itself, Pearl Harbor itself, was a declaration of war, and the U.S. the next day returns the favor by declaring war on Japan, and also decide to declare war on Japan's ally, which was Germany. Now, Germany has a different reaction to this. Germany, specifically Adolf Hitler, very upset. Adolf Hitler did not want the U.S. involved yet. He wanted them on the sidelines as long as possible because he was still in the process of defeating the British and the Soviets. And he believed that the Germans could handle one or both of them, and they could defeat at least one of them, and then it would be easier to defeat the other. But if the U.S. got involved before Germany was ready, then it would be a very difficult task to take out the Allies. So when he found out Pearl Harbor was bombed, he was not thrilled. And he said that he believed Japan had just woken a sleeping giant. And boy, was he right. So now the U.S. is directly ensnared in this conflict, and it is truly another world war. Just over 20 years after the end of World War I, a second world war has kicked off. Now, the concept of history, that is incredible. We go thousands of years without a global conflict. And then within 25 years, we have two of them. Now, a lot of that has to do with, or all of it really has to do with advancements in technology and communication and connecting the world in a way that it had not been connected before. So here's a quick map of the Pacific Islands. There's a diverse group here. Hawaii is obviously an American territory at the time. They don't become a state till the late 50s, but they're an American territory. Japan had taken most of those islands, a part of Southeast Asia, like Palau and PNG, and to the west of those unnamed islands, Indonesia and the Philippines, they had taken. They would be in the process of trying to take over Kiribati, the Solomon Islands, Fiji. And some of them they would, but this becomes important because eventually America is going to do what they call island hopping. And they are just going to defeat Japan on each individual island, because an island such as Kiribati by itself is not of any value really in warfare. An island such as Tahiti is not really of value by itself, or Wallis Futuna. By themselves, they don't mean much. But when you can take over all of the islands together, then as a whole, they are very valuable in territory. So now we have our metaphorical lines in the sand drawn. Pick your side. So we got the Allies, which includes the democratic nations. Now this is kind of a political war as well. The Axis powers, the big three being Germany, Italy, and Japan. Germany and Italy are fascist, openly fascist. Japan is an empire, so they have an emperor, but they have fascist qualities. So essentially, Axis powers are fascist. The Allies are, for the most part, democratic, meaning that that they vote. The people have a say. The people have a choice. Obviously, the United States, democratic nation. Great Britain is democratic in that their parliament is voted on by the people, and then Canada's got a prime minister. And people don't think Canada plays much of a role. Canada's very important in World War II. They are side by side with Great Britain and the U.S. And when we get to the Normandy invasions, Canadian soldiers actually play a big role in that attack. But those are the democratic nations, and kind of an outlier in all this would be the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is obviously not democratic. They're communist and they are a dictatorship. But they have a common enemy. And I've always said that mutual disdain or mutual hatred is stronger than mutual love or mutual appreciation. So it's not so much the Soviet Union loves the U.S. or has a great relationship with Britain or Canada. It's more the fact that they just have a common enemy in Germany. Think back to the beginning of this chapter, and Soviet Union signs an agreement with Germany, says not to fight against them. So, they didn't exactly have a powerful allegiance with the rest of the Allies. It was just the fact that when Germany double-crossed them, when Hitler double-crosses Stalin, it fills them with so much rage that now they're going to join sides with democratic nations to seek revenge on Germany. And man, just think about how different World War II might have been if Hitler had not double-crossed Joseph Stalin. We could be living in an entirely different world and possibly speaking German. So the leaders of these countries, for the U.S., Franklin Roosevelt was president from 1932 to 1944. Now into 45. 1932 to 1945, about 12 and a half years. By far the longest tenured American president. He's the only president to be elected to more than 2 terms. He's elected to 4. Now he dies within the first year of his 4th term, but he was there for quite a while, and he oversaw most of World War II. Now he unfortunately dies of polio, a disease that he had. He dies in 1945 and is replaced by his Vice President Harry S. Truman. So Truman oversees the end of World War II and the recovery from it. They're both extremely important people, and their relationship with the other allies is also extremely important. Now, Winston Churchill is the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and he's the man that that movie was about that I shared the link with. Winston Churchill was the man who had that quote that had the essential question over, and it was, "We shall never surrender." So if you didn't get that right, I would recommend going back and changing that before you turn in the essential questions. But Winston Churchill has a great relationship with Franklin Roosevelt. Him and Roosevelt were very close. They were honestly friends, which is very uncommon in the world to have. You know, there's allies. There's a difference between allies and friends. Allies are people that support you or support your endeavors and, you know, back you in the case of conflict. Friends are much more supportive. It's just a more emotional attachment. And Roosevelt and Churchill were very, very close. They were definitely friends. They wrote to each other often. They gave each other gifts. They were close. Truman and Churchill were fine. I wouldn't consider them friends, but they never had any problems with each other. They were on each other's side. Now Stalin he's different. I don't know if that man had any friends, even within his own circle. That's just his personality. He was horrifying. Now his own secretaries and his other Soviet Union government officials were terrified of him, so they'd tell him whatever he wanted to hear. Roosevelt was a classic politician, and what I mean by that is he knew how to kiss up to Stalin. Now, he didn't like bend the knee for him, and he didn't, you know, act like Stalin was superior or anything, but he showed him the respect Stalin wanted, and he said all the things that Stalin wanted to hear. So Stalin liked Roosevelt just fine. Truman was not that guy. Truman was very brash. He was not a suck up. He was he didn't take crap from anybody, and him and Stalin hated each other. Absolutely hated each other. They despised each other's existence. And that comes into play at the end of the war and after the war. But Truman's not in any kind of power position yet at this point in the chapter. And Churchill was kind of the same as Roosevelt. He was very agreeable with Stalin. They told him everything he wanted to hear, so that way they could get their help. So that's the Allies, and that's the people in charge of the Allies. So there we have the essential question. Simple. It's exactly what I wrote on the last slide. What were the three main Allied countries and who were their leaders? Now, when I say main, because the last slide mentions Canada, you don't include. Don't worry about adding Canada to this. I want the three main Allied countries and then each of their leaders. You can include both of the American leaders in this. So that's our essential question. Now, today, when you answer this question, now you can submit the assignment. Now you can submit it. I'll put a grade in, and the next week we will start on a new document. So that is today's lecture. I will stop it there. Once you guys get done with this and all your other classes, have a terrific weekend. Get out, go to the park, or go on a walk or something. Have a good day and a good weekend, and we will see you next week.